Welcome to today's historical deep dive, a journey not into the gilded halls of kings, but the mud-packed floors of the forgotten. Forget the fairy tales. Here, the monsters aren't under the bed. They're in the shadows of your own mind. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague, yet still milks them for cheese. Welcome to the Middle Ages. This is Sleepy History, and tonight we're stepping through the veil of centuries, not to observe, but to live. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know to bring these lost voices forward. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Would you be the farmer, the healer, the priest, the one who sees spirits in the rustling leaves? Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. You wake not gradually, but wrenched from a shallow sleep by the biting cold and the insistent ache in your belly. The straw rustles as you shift on the floor, seeking warmth that isn't there. The damp seeped in hours ago. Smoke from last night's meager fire, fueled by scavenged twigs and dung, hangs thick in the cramped space, stinging your eyes, catching in your throat, a constant companion in your small, crowded hut. 3 others breathe raggedly beside you. A wife, a child, a grandparent perhaps, their shapes indistinct in the pre-dawn gloom. Outside, the chill bites through the wattle and daub walls, promising another day defined not by ambition or joy, but by physical need, the gnawing hunger, the ever-present cold, the relentless demands of the sun's reluctant rise. This isn't a gentle start. It's a brutal jolt into the raw, undeniable fact of existence here, now, in the shadow of the manor lord's castle and the distant tolling of the church bell. Every breath feels earned. Every moment, a negotiation with forces far larger than yourself. The caprice of the weather, the hidden blight on the crops, the sudden fever that takes a neighbor overnight. There's no comfort here, beyond the close proximity of warm bodies, no hope beyond the simple necessity of seeing the next sunset. Survival isn't a goal you strive for. It's the steep price of waking up this morning. You rise, stiff and aching, your bare feet meeting the cold earth floor. The taste of smoke and stale air heavy on your tongue. The first task is always the same. Find a way to light the fire again. Find warmth. Find the next meal. Find the strength to face the relentless cycle. It's a life lived on the edge of depletion, where the smallest misstep can mean disaster, and hope is a fragile thing, easily extinguished by frost or famine or the shadow of a passing illness. Your world is small, bounded by the edge of the forest, the curve of the river, the authority of the Lord, and the terrifying mystery of the wider world beyond. Ask yourself, in this constant battle against the elements, against hunger, against unseen forces you barely understand, would you survive without choice? or bend just enough to fit the mold. The air outside is a shock to the lungs, sharper than the smoke within the hut. The sun is a rumor behind the low gray clouds. Your breath plumes out, a visible testament to the biting cold. You move through the tiny village, a cluster of huts, much like your own, a shared well, perhaps a small, roughly built chapel. You see the miller already stirring, his face pale with flour dust, the blacksmith coaxing embers back to life, a woman hunched by a meager fire outside her dwelling, stirring a thin pot. There's a quiet understanding in these early morning movements, a shared burden that transcends words. Each person is a node in this small, fragile network, dependent on the others, yet fiercely focused on their own immediate needs. You head towards the Lord's fields, the land you work but do not own, the source of both your potential sustenance and your required tithe. The earth here is hard, unforgiving, scarred by generations of plowing with simple wooden shares, pulled by oxen. The work will be relentless, backbreaking, from sunup to sundown. Planting the grain, weeding the rows, hauling dung for fertilizer, praying for rain at the right time, praying for sun at the right time, praying the blight won't take hold. Your relationship with the soil is intimate, fraught with hope and despair. You understand its moods, its subtle signs. But you are ultimately powerless against its larger dictates or the whims of the weather spirits you whisper prayers to. A surprising insight here. For many, time isn't measured by clocks or even calendars as we know them, but by the sun, the seasons, the liturgical calendar of the Church. Each saint's day, each feast or fast, dictates the rhythm of work and rest, belief and ritual. You might not know the year, but you know it's St. Martin's summer, or Candlemas is approaching, marking the slow turn from deep winter. This reliance on seasonal and religious time reinforces a feeling of living within a vast cyclical order, ordained by God and nature, where individual human plans are often secondary to larger, immutable forces. It's a perspective that fosters both patience and fatalism. Was it faith that saved them from despair, or the sheer, exhausting necessity of physical labor from dawn till dusk? You see a neighbor, Agatha, pausing at the edge of her plot, making the sign of the cross over the fallow ground before she begins to dig. She mutters words you can't quite catch, a mix of Latin prayer learned from the priest and older, earthier incantations passed down through generations. She believes the earth itself can be blessed or cursed, that spirits reside not just in heaven, but in the soil, the streams, the trees. Her rituals are as practical to her as sharpening her hoe. They are a form of technology, a way to influence forces beyond her control, a psychological shield against the crushing uncertainty of relying on nature for survival. This blend of formal Christian doctrine and ancient pagan belief is not hypocrisy, it is pragmatism. If the priest's prayers don't bring rain, perhaps a charm tied to a tree will. If the saint won't ward off illness, maybe carrying a specific bone or stone will. Beliefs layered, reinforced, hedging bets against a world filled with invisible dangers. Your own beliefs are a patchwork quilt of inherited wisdom, fear, and the hope offered by the distant church. You fear the evil eye as much as you fear damnation. You trust the village wise woman's poultices as much as the priest's blessings. In a world where understanding is limited and control is an illusion, every potential source of aid is courted. Ask yourself, if your life depended on the fickle nature of the earth and the terrifying unpredictability of illness, how many different gods, spirits, or saints would you try to appease? The sun, a pale disk in the sky, finally offers a little warmth, but the cold still bites at your fingers as they grip the rough wooden handle of the hoe. The rhythmic thud of the blade entering the earth, the scrape as you pull it back, becomes a monotonous soundtrack to the morning. Your back begins to ache, a familiar companion. You work alongside others, family, neighbors. The silence, broken only by grunts of effort, the occasional command from the Lord's bailiff, or a brief, weary exchange about the weather or the failing health of someone in the village. Community here is a matter of survival, a tight-knit web of mutual obligation and surveillance. You rely on your neighbors for help during harvest, for comfort in sorrow, for a shared meal if your own stores run low. But they also watch you. Every action is observed, every deviation from the norm noted. The village is a microcosm of the larger social order, where gossip can be as damaging as physical harm, and reputation is a fragile shield. A woman who speaks too freely, a man who shirks his duties, a family suspected of witchcraft because their cow gives too much milk. All are subject to scrutiny and potential ostracization. Consider the role of women. While often limited in public life, within the confines of the household and the immediate community, their power is significant. They manage the domestic economy, crucial in a subsistence world. They are the primary caregivers, the healers, the keepers of oral tradition and folklore. Their work is ceaseless, grinding grain, spinning thread, weaving cloth, preparing food, raising children, tending the garden, caring for livestock. Their bodies are central to the survival of the lineage, making childbirth a moment of immense vulnerability and profound importance. A successful birth is a blessing. A stillbirth or the death of a mother is a common, devastating tragedy, mourned but quickly moved past because the living must continue. There's a poignant irony in this. Women are simultaneously vital to the community's existence, and yet often seen as inherently weaker or more susceptible to spiritual dangers. The church doctrine teaches of Eve's sin, and old superstitions link women to moon cycles, hidden knowledge, and potential witchcraft. Yet it is a woman who will deliver the village babies, a woman who will lay out the dead, a woman who will know the properties of every herb in the nearby woods. Her hands, worn from labor, are the hands that literally hold the community together, though history rarely carves her name in stone. Ask yourself, in a world where physical labor and community bonds were paramount, how did the quiet strength of those whose voices were rarely heard in public shape the very fabric of everyday life? The sun reaches its zenith, casting shorter shadows. You pause your work, the silence feeling loud after the hours of rhythmic labor. Hunger gnaws, a dull, constant ache. Lunch is a simple affair, perhaps a crust of hard bread, a bit of cheese if you're fortunate, maybe a handful of dried beans or peas. Meat is a rare luxury, usually reserved for feast days or after the autumn slaughter. The staple is grain, porridge, bread, gruel. It's a diet dictated by necessity, often lacking in variety and nutrients, which contributes to chronic health issues and a shorter lifespan. Water is drawn from the communal well or a nearby stream, its cleanliness a matter of chance. Illness is not understood as germs. It's seen as an imbalance of humors, a punishment from God, or the work of malevolent spirits or curses. A simple fever can be a death sentence. The village healer, if there is one, might offer herbal remedies, some effective, many not, mixed with prayers and charms. The priest might offer blessings and last rites. Science, as we understand it, is non-existent. Your body is a fragile vessel, constantly under threat from invisible forces and internal decay. Consider the widespread belief in relics and pilgrimages. Why would people walk hundreds of miles, enduring hardship and danger, to see a bone fragment or piece of cloth said to belong to a saint? It wasn't just blind faith. It was a desperate hope for intervention in a world without effective medicine. A relic was seen as a tangible connection to divine power, a potential source of healing or protection against the overwhelming forces of disease and misfortune. It was a way of taking action when all other options seemed futile, a physical expression of profound vulnerability and fervent hope. There's a melancholic irony in their earnest efforts to appease a distant god or powerful saints while living in conditions that bred illness and suffering. They sought miraculous cures while drinking contaminated water and living in smoky, crowded huts. Their faith was often a coping mechanism, a way to rationalize unavoidable suffering and death. When a child died, as many did, it was God's will, or perhaps the result of a witch's curse, never the consequence of inadequate hygiene or poor nutrition. This worldview provided comfort and explanation, but it also obscured the true causes of their struggles. Ask yourself, if the physical world offered little respite and suffering was a constant companion, would you place your faith in tangible remedies or invisible powers? After the brief midday respite, the work continues, relentless, until the sun begins its slow descent towards the horizon. The ache in your back deepens. Your hands are rough and calloused. The smell of damp earth and sweat is thick in the air. As twilight approaches, the village slowly comes to life in a different way. Fires are rekindled, sending plumes of smoke into the evening sky. The sounds of daily life shift, not the tools of labor, but the murmur of voices, the crying of a child, the lowing of cattle being brought in, perhaps the distant sound of someone singing a simple, mournful tune. This is family time, But it is not leisure as we understand it. It is more work. Preparing the evening meal, another meager pottage or bread. Tending to children, repairing tools or clothing by firelight. Space is limited in the hut, privacy non-existent. Generations live together, sharing the warmth, the food, the burdens, and the limited joys. Relationships are forged in close proximity, bound by necessity and shared hardship. There is deep affection, fierce loyalty, and also the inevitable friction of living elbow to elbow. Consider the role of education, or the lack thereof. Most people cannot read or write. Knowledge is transmitted orally. Stories, proverbs, religious teachings from the priest. History is personal, passed down through family memory and village lore. The world beyond their immediate surroundings is a place of rumor and legend, populated by monstrous peoples, powerful rulers, and distant, holy lands. Their understanding of the cosmos is shaped by the church and folk belief. A flat earth, perhaps? Or a solid dome of stars, with heaven above and hell below. There's an almost poetic melancholy in this limited worldview. While it offered comfort in its perceived order and familiarity, it also fostered fear of the unknown and made them susceptible to misinformation and superstition. The inability to read meant reliance on others, the priest for spiritual guidance, the Lord for news of the wider world, often filtered to suit his purposes. Their lives were intensely local, their concerns immediate, their understanding of the grand sweep of history or geography virtually non-existent. Ask yourself, without access to written knowledge or a world beyond your village, how would you understand your place in the grand scheme of things? And what invisible dangers would you imagine lurking just beyond the horizon? As darkness falls completely, the village becomes a scattering of faint lights. Candles are a luxury, reserved sparingly. Most light comes from the central hearth fire, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Conversation is quiet, often focused on the day's work, the prospects for tomorrow, or tales and gossip. The boundaries between the human world and the spiritual world feel thin in the darkness. Tales of ghosts, fairies, and demons gain potency around the fire. Superstitions govern nightly rituals, leaving a bit of food out for benevolent spirits, making charms against the evil eye before sleeping, saying specific prayers for protection against nightmares or the attentions of malevolent forces. Sleep, when it comes, is often fitful, broken by the cold, the hard ground, the coughs of fellow occupants, or the sounds of animals outside. The threat of nighttime raids by bandits or wild animals is real, though less common in settled villages. But the fear of less tangible threats is perhaps even greater. Demons were believed to be most active at night, whispering temptations, causing illness, leading people astray. Sleep was a surrender, a moment of vulnerability when the soul might be exposed. A surprising insight. The intense focus on sin and damnation wasn't just theological. It was a daily psychological reality. Confession to the priest wasn't just a religious duty. It was a form of mental hygiene, a way to purge oneself of perceived impurities and ward off demonic influence. The fear of hell was a powerful motivator, shaping behavior, enforcing social norms, and providing a framework for understanding misfortune as divine punishment. This constant awareness of sin and the struggle for salvation created a pervasive undercurrent of anxiety beneath the surface of daily life. Consider the irony. They lived lives of brutal physical hardship, often dying young from disease or accident. Yet their primary existential fear was the eternal torment of the soul. They endured hell on earth, only to dread a worse one in the afterlife. This deeply ingrained belief system, while offering a path to salvation through faith and good works and tithes, also placed immense psychological pressure on individuals, magnifying guilt and fear. Was their piety born of genuine devotion, or a desperate, all-consuming terror of eternal damnation? The night is long. Every sound is amplified. The rustle of straw, the breathing of sleeping bodies, the wind rattling the hut walls, a distant owl call. The cold seeps deeper into your bones. The darkness is absolute once the fire dies down, save for the faint glow of coals. You lie there, huddled with others, listening to the sounds of the night, the sounds of a world untamed by electric light or constant noise. Your senses are sharper here. You listen for the cry of a fox, the bark of a dog, the movements of neighbors. The silence between sounds feels vast, ancient. This profound connection to the natural world, dictated by its rhythms and dangers, is a defining feature of medieval life. They lived within nature, not separate from it. The forest was both provider, wood, berries, nuts, game if you dared hunt, and a place of fear. Wild animals, outlaws, rumored supernatural beings. Rivers provided water, but could also flood or freeze, cutting off movement. The weather wasn't just inconvenient. It was life or death, determining the success of the harvest. Their lives were a constant negotiation with these powerful, unpredictable forces. A surprising insight. Despite the hardship and fear, moments of unexpected joy and beauty existed. A successful harvest festival, a wedding, the birth of a healthy child, the simple pleasure of a warm fire on a cold night, the beauty of a clear, star-filled sky, utterly free from light pollution, the taste of the first berries in spring. These small moments were cherished precisely because they were rare and hard-won, islands of light in a sea of struggle. There's a quiet dignity in their resilience, a refusal to be utterly broken by the relentless challenges. They found strength in community, in faith, however fearful, and in the simple, cyclical continuation of life. Their lives were not epic tales, but a million small acts of survival, repetition, and endurance. They were the bedrock upon which the castles and cathedrals were built, the unrecorded majority whose labor sustained the visible structures of medieval society. Ask yourself, in a life stripped of comfort and control, where would you find your moments of grace? Your reasons to greet the cold embrace of dawn one more time? The darkness begins to gray at the edges. The air grows colder still, just before the light truly breaks. The cycle is beginning anew. You hear the first cough from your youngest. Feel the familiar ache in your gut. The straw rustles as you prepare to rise. We tend to view the Middle Ages through the lens of knights and castles, plagues and crusades, the dramatic, the extraordinary. But for the vast majority, life was lived on this scale: the cold hut, the endless fields, the fear of illness, the struggle for enough food, the comforting terror of familiar superstitions. Their history is written, not in chronicles, but in the worn handles of their tools, the ruts of ancient paths, the resilience encoded in our very DNA. They had no legacy carved in stone for themselves, only for their lords and their faith. But every seed they planted, every prayer they whispered in terror, every small act of kindness or cruelty within their village built the world we now take for granted, laying the silent foundation for everything that came after. Your hands, calloused and cracked, grip the rough wooden handle of the hoe. The ground is stubbornly hard, yielding inch by painful inch. Your back screams a protest it makes every morning. This isn't merely work. It is a primal negotiation with the soil itself, a desperate plea for sustenance from the stubborn earth. Every muscle strains, every breath is a shallow pant in the cold air. This physical connection to the land is total, brutal, and non-negotiable. Your body is the primary tool, its strength or weakness dictating your fate. Your very existence is mapped onto the seasons. You feel the promise of spring in the thawing soil, the crushing weight of summer's sun, the frantic urgency of the harvest, and the slow, gnawing hunger of winter's grip. To be alive is to ache. To be well is a temporary blessing between fevers and chills, between the nagging cough that settles in your chest and the sudden, violent grip of the flux that empties you until you are weak as a newborn mouse. There is no cushioned future, no distant retirement. Only the relentless, immediate demand of survival. When the harvest is poor, the parish bell tolls not just for the dead, but for the hunger that will stalk the living through the long nights. Superstition isn't a quaint habit, it's a desperate shield. You spit 3 times when a black cat crosses your path, not because you fully believe the devil sent it, but because the cost of not doing so feels too high, too reckless in a world teetering constantly on the edge of disaster. You offer a small coin to the shrine of Saint Isidore, the patron of farmers, praying for a blessing on your meager plot, knowing deep down that wind, rain, and blight care little for saints. But the act of kneeling offers a moment's illusory control in a life utterly defined by forces you cannot command. The surprising insight isn't just how hard they worked, but how this physical grind shaped their reality and beliefs. Their worth was literally tied to their physical output. A weak body meant a weak harvest, meant hunger, meant perhaps becoming a beggar, ostracized, facing the cold charity of others, or worse, starvation. Life expectancy isn't just a statistic. It's the constant, low hum of your own vulnerability. They saw the plague as God's wrath, yes, but they also felt it as a physical corruption, a rot in the body politic, mirroring the rot in their own limbs from endless toil. Their understanding of good and evil was often tied to physical well-being. Health, a sign of favor. Sickness, a sign of sin or demonic interference. Their bodies were battlegrounds, not just for their souls, but for their very right to exist another day. Ask yourself, if your daily bread depended entirely on the strength of your hands and the fickle favor of the weather, with no safety net, no escape route, how would you view the world? Would you fight against such absolute, brutal control? Or would you simply bend, offering your body to the earth in silent, weary submission, praying only that it might bend back just enough to grant you another season? Welcome to today's historical deep dive, to a world where the calendar is measured by the rising and falling of the sun, the planting and the harvest, the tolling of bells marking births, marriages, and the relentless tide of death. You've never seen a toothbrush. You believe demons live in fog. Your town blames goats for the plague. Welcome to the Middle Ages, a time not of knights and castles for most, but of mud, hunger, and the bone-deep ache of manual labor under indifferent skies. Forget the romanticized tales. This is the dirt, the fear, the quiet, desperate hope woven into the fabric of everyday survival. This is the story of people whose lives were defined by limitations we can barely comprehend, whose every day was a negotiation with forces both seen and unseen. The Lord's tax, the unpredictable weather, the ever-present threat of illness, the whispered fears of witchcraft and ill fortune carried on the wind. They lived lives of stark simplicity, where a full belly was a luxury, literacy a rare gift, and the vast dark woods surrounding their village held both the promise of game and the terror of the unknown. Their legacy isn't written in grand declarations or technological leaps, but in the stubborn resilience of the human spirit, in the quiet handing down of simple skills and hard-won wisdom from one calloused hand to the next. It's a history etched not in stone, but in the furrowed earth, the patched tunic, the shared warmth of a meager fire. If you love immersive, real storytelling about survival, belief, and forgotten lives, hit like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with the medieval fact that surprised you most, or what role you think you'd play if you were born in the year 1287. Would you be a miller's apprentice, smelling perpetually of flour dust? A scullery maid, perpetually chapped and weary? A farmer, bound to the land as surely as any serf? Or perhaps, just perhaps, one of the few blessed enough to learn to read? Let's begin and live the life they never got to finish. You mend a broken fence post, your fingers fumbling with rough twine. The wood is splintered, the cold seeping into your knuckles. You work with tools that are less implements and more extensions of your own straining body. The axe, its head pitted and dull, is chipped near the edge where it struck unexpected stone years ago. A scar you recognize intimately. The worn shovel, its wooden handle smooth with the sweat and grime of countless hands, feels like a natural continuation of your arm. The basic scythe, heavier and less balanced than you wish, demands a rhythm you've learned through sheer repetition. Each swing a risk to your own ankle if your focus slips. These are not tools of choice, not specialized instruments for nuanced tasks. They are tools of necessity, few, precious, and utterly essential to the raw act of staying alive. There is no room for a dozen different hammers, no need for complicated gears or refined alloys. Survival relies on mastering the basics of these simple implements, coaxing a living from unforgiving earth with the limited metal and shaped wood you possess. Each tool in your small collection tells a story. The hoe, with a handle repaired multiple times, wrapped in leather strips. The mallet, fashioned from a tree branch, sturdy enough for stakes, but clumsy for fine work. The simple saw, its teeth unevenly filed. They speak of relentless use, of urgent repairs done in the flickering light of a tallow candle, of the absolute, terrifying reliance placed upon them. If the axe head splits completely, you cannot fell trees for firewood or building. If the shovel breaks, you cannot turn the soil to plant your peas or dig a grave for a fallen neighbor. These are not just objects. They are gatekeepers to the next harvest, the next warm night, the very possibility of life continuing. Innovation is a concept as distant as the king's court. Immediate, practical function is all that matters. You don't need a better way to mend a fence post. You need this piece of twine and that clumsy awl to make it hold until the next windstorm. There is a surprising insight here, the sheer value of simplicity. In a world where everything is scarce, the tools that do one thing well and can be repaired repeatedly are infinitely more valuable than complex devices that might break irrevocably. This forces a practical wisdom, a focus on utility over elegance. It also highlights a chilling truth about class. Those with more tools, even slightly better ones, possessed a significant, almost invisible advantage in the relentless struggle for survival. A village blacksmith, if you are fortunate enough to have one, holds immense power. His small forge a beacon of hope against blunted edges and broken shafts. But even his tools are rudimentary by modern standards. You watch a man trying to straighten a bent nail, hammering it against a rock. This is your metallurgy. This is your technology. Ask yourself, would you possess the ingenuity to mend what little you had? Or would you simply break and starve when your vital tools failed? Could you bend just enough to fit the mold of absolute physical necessity? Or would the sheer, unyielding demand for basic function shatter you? These simple shapes of wood and metal are not just tools. They are the very definition of your struggle, your hope, and your terrifying vulnerability. They are the boundary between a meager existence and the swift, cold embrace of the grave. The door is a thick plank, crudely hung, and it slams shut behind you, sealing out the wind's howl. Instantly, the air thickens. It's the smell of wood smoke, heavy and clinging, a scent that never truly leaves your hair or clothes. This is it, the smoke-filled home. Inside your dwelling, the air is a perpetual haze of wood smoke, coiling down from the smoke hole in the roof, finding purchase on rafters, walls, and everything you own. In winter, it's a comfort, a visible manifestation of the life-giving heat radiating from the hearth at the room's center. But even then, it stings your eyes, blurring the faces of your family huddled close. In summer, when the fire is smaller but still necessary for cooking, it's simply a nuisance, a hot, acrid blanket that refuses to dissipate, coating everything in a fine, greasy layer of soot. You cough, deep and rasping, a sound that echoes among generations in this single space. Yet, this smoke is more than just a byproduct of necessity. It wards off the buzzing flies and biting insects that swarm in the warmer months, an unintentional blessing. And always, it signals the presence of the fire, the true heart of this small, dark world. The hearth is not just where food is cooked. It's where stories are told in flickering light, where hands are warmed against the bone-deep chill, where the boundary between human and beast blurs on the coldest nights, livestock sometimes brought inside for shared warmth. This single room is kitchen, bedroom, workshop, and shelter for your entire family. Grandparents, parents, children, maybe cousins or an aging relative, all share this one space. Privacy is a concept utterly alien here. Every birth, every death, every argument, every act of intimacy happens within earshot and often within sight of everyone else. You learn to exist in constant proximity, a tide of bodies shifting and resettling. Your home is not a place for solitary retreat. It is a fortress against the elements, the wild, and the threats lurking outside. Its structure is simple, often just timber or wattle and daub, but it represents survival stripped down to essentials. It is protection, warmth, and the undeniable, sometimes suffocating, reality of shared existence. Is the lack of personal space a loss? You sit on the edge of the hearth, the rough wooden bowl balanced on your knees. Before you is the familiar sight, the eternal truth of your meal. Pottage. Not the rich, thick stews you might imagine in stories, but a thin, watery gruel, a sacrifice of flavor on the altar of survival. It's a meager offering. Boiled grains, maybe barley or oats, whatever hardy roots the soil yielded. Perhaps a few wild herbs gathered from the edge of the forest, if you were fortunate that day. A pinch of precious salt, maybe, if you could afford it or trade for it. It tastes of earth and boiled water, a ghost of nutrition clinging to the spoon. There is no ceremony here, no lingering over courses, only the quiet, rhythmic action of lifting the spoon to your lips, swallowing the lukewarm mixture, and feeling it settle, a small weight against the perpetual emptiness within. This is sustenance. This is dinner. Meat is a whispered legend, a feast day dream. You've heard tales of lords' tables groaning under the weight of roasted joints, seen the fleeting image of a hunted deer dragged through the village, the blood staining the muddy path. But for you, meat is a scent carried on the wind from the manor kitchens, a bone tossed to the dogs, never a meal for your own bowl. Even small game is forbidden. Hunting rights belong to the Lord, and poaching means severe punishment, perhaps even the loss of a hand. A limb you need desperately just to scrape a living from the land. You eat to live. There is no joy in this act, only necessity. Hunger is a constant, dull ache in your belly, a low hum that is sometimes ignored, sometimes sharpens to a desperate, gnawing pain that keeps you awake in the dark. Food is not a choice of flavor, of texture, of preference. It is a calculated measure, a ration against the ever-present threat of starvation. Your life is a constant negotiation with the earth, with the seasons, with the weather, hoping for a good harvest, dreading a blight, praying the stored grains will last until the next crop comes in. The sheer monotony of this diet strips away all pretense. Life is reduced to its most fundamental equation: calories in versus calories out. Every kernel of grain is precious. Every edible scrap is a victory. Waste is a sin against God and against your own future. This relentless focus on the basic mechanics of eating reshapes your worldview. Superstitions sprout around the harvest, rituals to appease the earth spirits, prayers against pests, blessings for the grain. You sit on the edge of the hearth, the rough wooden bowl balanced on your knees. Before you is the familiar sight, the eternal truth of your meal: pottage. Not the rich, thick stews you might imagine in stories, but a thin, watery gruel, a sacrifice of flavor on the altar of survival. It's a meager offering. Boiled grains, maybe barley or oats, whatever hardy roots the soil yielded, perhaps a few wild herbs gathered from the edge of the forest if you were fortunate that day. A pinch of precious salt, maybe, if you could afford it or trade for it. It tastes of earth and boiled water, a ghost of nutrition clinging to the spoon. There is no ceremony here, no lingering over courses, only the quiet, rhythmic action of lifting the spoon to your lips, swallowing the lukewarm mixture, and feeling it settle, a small weight against the perpetual emptiness within. This is sustenance. This is dinner. Meat is a whispered legend, a feast day dream. You've heard tales of lords' tables groaning under the weight of roasted joints, seen the fleeting image of a hunted deer dragged through the village, the blood staining the muddy path. But for you, meat is a scent carried on the wind from the manor kitchens, a bone tossed to the dogs, never a meal for your own bowl. Even small game is forbidden. Hunting rights belong to the Lord, and poaching means severe punishment, perhaps even the loss of a hand. A limb you need desperately just to scrape a living from the land. You eat to live. There is no joy in this act, only necessity. Hunger is a constant, dull ache in your belly, a low hum that is sometimes ignored, sometimes sharpens to a desperate, gnawing pain that keeps you awake in the dark. Food is not a choice of flavor, of texture, of preference. It is a calculated measure, a ration against the ever-present threat of starvation. Your life is a constant negotiation with the earth, with the seasons, with the weather, hoping for a good harvest, dreading a blight, praying the stored grains will last until the next crop comes in. The sheer monotony of this diet strips away all pretense. Life is reduced to its most fundamental equation: calories in versus calories out. Every kernel of grain is precious. Every edible scrap is a victory. Waste is a sin against God and against your own future. This relentless focus on the basic mechanics of eating reshapes your worldview. Superstitions sprout around the harvest, rituals to appease the earth spirits, prayers against pests, blessings for the grain. You sit on the edge of the hearth, the rough wooden bowl balanced on your knees. Before you is the familiar sight, the eternal truth of your meal: pottage. Not the rich, thick stews you might imagine in stories, but a thin, watery gruel, a sacrifice of flavor on the altar of survival. It's a meager offering. Boiled grains, maybe barley or oats, whatever hardy roots the soil yielded, perhaps a few wild herbs gathered from the edge of the forest if you were fortunate that day. A pinch of precious salt, maybe, if you could afford it or trade for it. It tastes of earth and boiled water, a ghost of nutrition clinging to the spoon. There is no ceremony here, no lingering over courses, only the quiet, rhythmic action of lifting the spoon to your lips, swallowing the lukewarm mixture and feeling it settle, a small weight against the perpetual emptiness within. This is sustenance. This is dinner. Meat is a whispered legend, a feast day dream. You've heard tales of lords' tables groaning under the weight of roasted joints, seen the fleeting image of a hunted deer dragged through the village, the blood staining the muddy path. But for you, meat is a scent carried on the wind from the manor kitchens, a bone tossed to the dogs, never a meal for your own bowl. Even small game is forbidden. Hunting rights belong to the Lord, and poaching means severe punishment, perhaps even the loss of a hand. A limb you need desperately just to scrape a living from the land. You eat to live. There is no joy in this act, only necessity. Hunger is a constant, dull ache in your belly, a low hum that is sometimes ignored, sometimes sharpens to a desperate, gnawing pain that keeps you awake in the dark. Food is not a choice of flavor, of texture, of preference. It is a calculated measure, a ration against the ever-present threat of starvation. Your life is a constant negotiation with the earth, with the seasons, with the weather, hoping for a good harvest, dreading a blight, praying the stored grains will last until the next crop comes in. The sheer monotony of this diet strips away all pretense. Life is reduced to its most fundamental equation: calories in versus calories out. Every kernel of grain is precious. Every edible scrap is a victory. Waste is a sin against God and against your own future. This relentless focus on the basic mechanics of eating reshapes your worldview. Superstitions sprout around the harvest, rituals to appease the earth spirits, prayers against pests, blessings for the grain.